Hey everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Terry White, worldwide photography evangelist here at Adobe. It's my pleasure to be streaming to you once again live from my Atlanta studio on a beautiful sunny day. Kind of chilly, but beautiful sunny day here in Atlanta. So if this is your first time watching Adobe Live, welcome to Masterclass Friday. Masterclass Friday is where the Adobe evangelists get to spend an hour with you each on their own disciplines. So before me, you saw Paul Tranny doing graphic design. Then I'll be doing photography, obviously, and then we take intermittent breaks of doing daily creative challenges. So after me will be a Photoshop daily creative challenge, and then Paul will be back for Photoshop, and then Jason will be here for audio and video, and then I think there's another daily creative challenge sprinkled in there somewhere. But then you'll also see Howard Pinsky doing UI UX design, as well as Kyle Webster doing digital art, painting, and drawing. So full day, you can hang out, you can come back, you can watch the replays. If you're watching the replay right now, how is it in the future? Is everything cool still? If you're watching the replays right now, thanks for watching the replays. And if you are watching somewhere else, I know there are people maybe watching on YouTube, they may be watching on Facebook, they may be watching on Twitter, LinkedIn. Welcome. You can certainly hang out where you are right now, but you can also, if you want to participate in the chat, head over to b.net/Adobe Live. That's the little banner I've got up in the upper corner that way. b.net/Adobe Live. And that is where I'll be paying attention to the main chat. I may see the other chat. Let me pop over there right now to just say hi to people so you know I am here. Tasman Harris and Kevin Stewart and Dale and Jason alike. Hey, Jason, how's it going? Carlos. So all the people over there in that chat on various channels, welcome. But if you want me to really see a question, if you really want me to see a comment, head over to b.net/Adobe Live. That's where I'll be spending most of my visual attention looking at the chat. So on that main chat, I see Bruce, I see Andreas, I see Clifton, I see Dana Pride, I saw Rufus earlier, JR Flores. Welcome, everyone. And again, glad that you are all here. All right, so what are we doing today? Today, we're going to be taking a look at this. We're going to be doing 10 tips for retouching and editing your photos. And again, targeting this mainly to photographers. This is not by any means a professional high-end retouching class. We're going to spend hours and hours on every little pixel. But this is kind of like the 10 things I think people need to pay attention to or need to know how to do to edit most common situations in your photos. Now, normally I do also how I would edit your photo. So maybe we'll do that the week after the break for the holiday. And that way you get to see how I would edit your submissions. So we do that at least once a month, once every couple months as well. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's go ahead and turn off that banner there. And I'm going to switch over to my desktop. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to do things a little differently today, a little differently than I normally do. I'm going to be obviously toggling back and forth between Photoshop and Lightroom Classic. I won't really get into Lightroom today, the cloud-based version, but because I'm not showing anything in Classic that you couldn't do in the other one. So if you see me do something in Lightroom, know that you can do it in either version. And also, in most cases, you can even do it on mobile. But one of the things I will do is, since I have 10 things to cover, I don't want to get caught up and run out of time, like get to the 7th thing and I'm out of time and I don't get to show the last 3. So I've got several examples for each of the 10 things, and I'm just going to keep rotating through them until I do run out of time. So that way, at least I'll get through the 10, you'll know what they are, and then we'll start over again and show a different example for each one. So that way, you can kind of like just watch the first 10. And if that's all you need, you're good to go. You can have a great weekend. And if you want to stay and see more examples of each one, that way you can just hang out and watch the rest of the hour and see examples of each one. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and start off with a cropping, straightening, and recomposing example. So I'm going to open up this one. This is my favorite example here. And with this example open, actually, that's not my favorite example, sorry. Let's close that one. That's not the favorite one. It was this other one. This is my favorite example. All right, this is an example. Now, a lot of these are I'll tell you if it's my photo or not. This is not my photo. This is from Adobe Stock. And I purposely looked for photos like this because they're great for cropping. So in Adobe Stock, people usually leave a lot of space, headroom, space to the sides for copy space. In other words, for someone to put their text above or to the side of the image. And that's what this example is. However, what I don't like about this example is that, or I love it for editing, but what I don't like about it if I were buying a stock image is I love that you left me space for the copy. I don't like the space. Like, I don't like that roof line with all the tiles or whatever those are. Like, let's fix that. So let's do that with a cropping example. Now, again, I'll tell you why I'm in each one. So I'm doing this in Photoshop because Photoshop, even though Lightroom can crop, Photoshop has a couple of features for cropping that Lightroom doesn't have. So that's why I'm doing this particular example in Photoshop, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. All right, so let's go grab the crop tool. And if you need it to crop to a specific ratio in either program, you can choose, hey, I need this to be an 8:10, I need this to be a 5:7, whatever. You can crop to a specific ratio. That's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is that Photoshop, unlike Lightroom, has these two choices. I can choose to delete the pixels, meaning make it destructive, get rid of those pixels when I crop them, or not delete the pixels. Don't make it destructive. Always be able to come back and get the rest of the stuff I cropped off. But this is the big one, content aware. We'll see why that's important in a minute. So I'm going to say yes. In this case, I do want to get rid of the pixels. You'll see why in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and just crop it down and say, yay, I got rid of those pixels. And that would be the final image. And that would be the one that looks better just from a recomposition standpoint. It doesn't have all that extra space. However, if the person then came back and said, well, no, we need that extra space because we are going to put some marketing messages above it. What I wouldn't want is those tiles. So I deleted those pixels. They're gone. I can undo, but they're gone. But now if I turn on content aware and I click again and I uncrop, so in other words, now I'm telling it to add back in this much space, as much as I want. Now when I click OK, instead of it uncropping, meaning bringing back the tiles, what it will be forced to do is use the surrounding pixels to fill that space back in. So instead of it uncropping, now I get a much cleaner image from this crop. So that's I think it's pretty cool cropping example of I took care of two problems. I got rid of something that was distracting. I added copy space back in, and I'm letting Photoshop use its content aware fill technologies to bring in the rest of that wall. Now, the only thing I was worried about, I will be honest, the only thing I was kind of like, will it work? Is that, it could have just as easily brought up this little thing she was holding. So I would have had to clone that out or patch that out had it done it. But in this case, smart AI, smart machine learning, it actually figured out, hey, he probably doesn't want that. Let's pull it back up. Okay, so that was just a cropping example. So again, I got more examples. We're just going to move on to the next one. That way we get through them all. All right, next one. Let's close this one. Next one is I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose we're going to talk about white balance. So cropping and recomposing. And again, I'll get back to more examples of that, but just know that, we take pictures and we don't always need to know that there's a bunch of space around it that doesn't add to the story. So just always think, can I be tighter? Can it be cropped? Even if it's after the fact? That's why we do cropping. All right, moving on to the next example. Next example is, we're going to go in and let's see, I got a couple comments here. Jan saying, Jan or Jan, I don't know which pronunciation you're using, but okay, this is cool. Andres, that's cool. Wow, didn't even know that one from search. So, hey, yay, you're learning stuff. Cool. All right, next up, let's talk about white balance. I think I got a white balance example in here somewhere. There we go, white balance. And what white balance is it's correcting, technically it's correcting the color. It's making the color of the photo the color it should be. For example, if I were to open up one of these other examples I've used in the past, I'm trying to use new things. But if I open up this photo I've used in the past, this is from a family reunion. And it's overly yellow, like everything in the photo is yellow because the white balance is off. So that's an example of what white balance being off looks like. It could be yellow, it could be blue, it could be a bunch of colors. But when you know it's off, whatever color it's off by, it's when you see the image and you know the color in that image is not right. So in other words, that wall should be gray and it's like kind of brownish, beigeish, like I know the white balance is off in this photo because the wall's not the right color. Someone posted a picture of a white car. And every time I saw that car, it bugged me, not because of the car, but because the car was white, but it looked kind of blue. It had like a blue overcast on it. I was like, oh, the white balance is off on that photo. It's driving me crazy. So when you see a color that's off, you know it's not the right color it should be, it's usually a white balance problem. Now, how do we fix white balance? Well, if you were in Lightroom, which is where I normally do it, you would, here, we'll do it here. We'll do it on one of these. We'll use this example first. We'll do it on one of these. All right, so for example, if I select this photo in Lightroom or Lightroom Classic, the way I know the white balance is off is because that wall is blue. It should be white. That's a white backdrop. So when I see that blue tint, I know something's wrong. All right, so how would I fix it here? Well, luckily in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic, you've got a white balance eyedropper. You've even got it right here. So you can just go ahead and click. And what you're going to click the white balance eyedropper on, and by the way, when you hover over the photo, this is one thing I love about Classic over regular Lightroom, is that it shows you a preview in the navigator. It shows you, hey, if you click right here, it's going to make it worse. That's not what you want. That's just going to make it more blue. So you can hover around and see what would work, but here's what you just know to aim for. You aim for something that's neutral, or should be neutral. Like the gray in her blouse, that's a neutral color. I would be aiming for the grays in the image. 18% gray is what we're usually targeting, but you won't always have 18% gray to click on. So if I can't find a gray, the next color I would look for is something that should be white or should be black. So what I mean by that is, let's say she didn't have that gray blouse on. Well, what should be white should be this backdrop. And you notice when I hover over it, look, it's going to fix it. And over here in this upper corner where there's some vignetting, it's a little gray or a little black, but that should be gray or black. It shouldn't be blue. So the minute I click on it, it fixes it. Now, if it didn't fix it to your taste, because again, white balance is subjective also, even though proper white balance doesn't mean the image is going to look the way you want it to look. You've still got the temperature slider as a fine tuning. In other words, if I click to make the white balance whatever color it should be, and I think it should be cooler, I think it should be warmer, then I could always drag the white balance slider a little more to the left or a little more to the right to make it whatever I think it should be after I've set it to the proper white balance. Usually proper white balance is great, but proper white balance isn't always great on people. Now, also, you'll see me doing a lot of people examples today because people because you've asked for it. In other words, people are saying, hey, you do a lot of landscapes and travel stuff. Can you show us some more portrait work? And this is why we're doing this today with more portrait work, because you asked for it. All right. This is every Friday. Yes, Dan, this is every Friday except Fridays where we're off. So it's usually every Friday. So like, for example, it won't be next Friday because we're off, but it'll be the Friday after. Okay, next, let's go in, and that was a white balance example. And just again, quickly, I know I would say I would only show you one, but since I had that one open in Photoshop, let's do it in Photoshop really quickly. Now in Photoshop, there's all kinds of ways to fix the white balance, but since the eyedropper is so easy, I prefer to do it in Camera Raw. And of course, anytime you're going to go to a filter, you can always convert for smart filters first to make it non-destructive. So if I do that first, yeah, don't show me again, I get it. If I do that first, now if I set the white balance or do anything in Camera Raw filter, it will always be undoable. So if I go to Camera Raw filter, brings up the same thing, same white balance eyedropper, even though it looks a little smaller, click, and that makes that backdrop gray. So it's a very subtle change, but it makes it the gray it should be as opposed to the kind of brown it was. So that's the before, That's the after. And again, just a very subtle change on the white balance. So number one, cropping, straightening, recomposing. Number two, fix your white balance. And we're getting some colorization stuff as well. But that's number two. All right, number three. Let's get into the third one. And then we're going to keep rotating through them, keep doing more examples. Let me close this. Actually, I'll leave that open so I don't have to keep going back and forth. Next one up, we're going to do some sharpening and noise reduction. Let me do a little bit of each. Let's go back to Lightroom. And I've got a little bit of each on this one. So why do you need noise reduction? What's noise? When you have a photo that you took in usually low lighting conditions, meaning there wasn't enough light to properly expose the photo at a high or a low ISO, then your camera, if you didn't do it manually, your camera would adjust, like a smartphone would adjust the ISO to be higher to capture the scene without blurring it. So for example, here's a picture of a flower. At first glance, looks fine. Not the best flower in the world, but the shot looks fine. But if I were to zoom in, you see all this grain, all these little white pixels, all these little white specks? That's noise. In other words, this was shot at, let's see what the ISO 3200. So you normally are trying to target like ISO 100. So 200, 300, 400. But if you have to go that high because there wasn't enough light and it needed to expose the shot, then you're going to end up with noise. You're going to end up with grain. Now, the sensors on our cameras have gotten better and better and better over time. So we get a lot less of this, but it hasn't been eliminated yet. So you're going to end up with noise. So how do we get rid of this? Well, luckily in Lightroom and Camera Raw, you can go into the Develop module and you can go in and there's a Detail tab. So if I go to Detail, Detail is two things. It's Sharpening, which this photo's already been sharpened automatically as a raw file. But it's also got noise reduction, the second section down here. So if I were to choose to increase the noise reduction, that grain kind of just goes away. Now that looks like magic, and it is, but there's also the downside. And Sean's making a funny statement there because he's right. The downside is, well, oh, wow, that's cool. Reduce the noise. I don't see that grain anymore. The downside is, or that's the upside. The downside is that it adds or it reduces the sharpness. So it's a trade-off. You reduce the noise, but you also reduce, it's not as sharp as it used to be. And then you might say, well, can't you just go back up and increase the sharpness? You can, but it's not quite the same thing. It's not like, oh, it'll be just as sharp as it was before you reduce the noise. So that's why I only drag the slider over as much as I can tolerate, as opposed to just drag it all the way over, get rid of all the noise. And here's the other thing you have to also look at is before I did the noise reduction, let's put the noise reduction back down to 0. Would I have noticed it? No. But if I zoom in or make a giant print, then yeah, I'll probably see it. But so you have to ask yourself, is the noise reduction really worth it? Like if you're okay with reducing the noise to get rid of that grain, but you're look at, by the way, you can really see it right in here. I'll give you an example of reducing that quality. Look in there. When I reduce the noise, watch what happens to the flower right in that area. See how it starts to get blurry right in there? Because when you say reduce the noise, you're also reducing the sharpness. And if you're okay with that, so be it. Now, how can I get some of that sharpness back? Well, I could always increase sharpness. See, but it didn't come back as much as it was. Here, let me increase it some more. And then I could also use the new texture slider. That will probably give me more texture. But then it's going to start making the noise that's left more pronounced. So it's literally a trade-off between noise and quality. Noise and quality. If you want the sharpness, you're going to have to live with a certain amount of noise, or better yet, shoot on a tripod. Let it do a long exposure. Then you don't have to deal with shooting at ISO. You won't have, or ISO 100. You won't have the noise. So again, this is only because you didn't have a choice. Like low light, you didn't have a tripod, couldn't do a long exposure, or it was on a smartphone and it introduced noise because of it. So the best way to have not to eliminate noise is to not have it in the first place. But that's my noise example. Now let's talk about sharpening. Da, 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 da. I gave you one little sharpening tip just with texture. Let me give you one here as well. That's actually a different example though, but let's go in here. All right, so here, just zoom in on this spot. Actually, it doesn't matter because I'm going to develop module first. Okay, now we're in develop module, we're in the spot. So I've got this shot of the Sphinx I shot in Egypt. This is one of my photos, and it's never sharp enough for me. I just never, I think I might have even handheld this shot, so there's always a slight bit of camera shake. But anyway, texture just goes nuts on this photo, this kind of photo. So this is the kind of photo texture was designed for, where you've got lots of details, lots of things. Now you might ask, well, when would you use texture versus clarity? And I just showed it. When you use texture, you're literally just affecting the texture. When you use clarity, you're affecting both the texture and the shadows and highlights. So the shadows are getting darker, the highlights are getting lighter, like you're affecting the tonal properties too. And that may be what you want to get more contrast. So just remember, it's what you want. So if that's what you want, use clarity. If you just want the texture, just use texture. And again, it's just going to make that print that much better, that image that much better, just by adding a little bit of sharpness to it. All right, I'm going to come back later and do a person example for sharpness, because again, I'm trying to stick to my rule of only doing one thing until we get through them all, then come back and doing more. All right, so that was sharpening and noise reduction. Let's get into removing distractions, which actually that's what this photo was. I tagged this photo for, so let's get into that. I'm going to tell you a story about this particular trip. Really quickly, went to Egypt. I was on business. We only got to shoot this one day, and middle of the day, sun, all kinds of horrible things, from not being out there at the right time of day. But when I got back home, not this particular shot, but one of these shots, I print it and put up on the wall. And every time I walked past that shot, I couldn't help but notice something I wish I had fixed. And I think I took the shot down because it was so distracting to me. In Egypt, the pyramids are awesome, but it's modern times. So what they tend to do is this. They tend to put antennas and things up on top of the pyramids that are awfully distracting. Like you wouldn't notice it zoomed out like that, but when it's on a big 20 by 30 or a 30 by 40 print, you kind of see that antenna. And every time I walk past it, like that antenna was driving me crazy. So the thing is, get rid of the distractions, because, Rufus, I love the subtle changes too. Get rid of the distractions, because you know what? It's going to bug the crap out of you every time you walk past it or see it if it's big. So in this case, how would I get rid of this distraction? I think I would do it in Photoshop, but if I were to do this in Lightroom, I'll show you a quick example of each. You have the healing brush or the spot removal tool, depending on which application you're in. It's called different things, but it's this tool. And I'm making my brush smaller so that I can, instead of one big click, I can actually paint with it. And depending on how close I am to those edges may work, they may not, because this tool is less accurate than the one in Photoshop. All right, so I haven't let go yet. When I let go, it's going to go find a spot to use. And it found, I don't know where it went. It's over there somewhere, but it found that spot. Yeah, and it's even using part of that, part of the other pyramid. So this is what I meant by you get some of that distortion depending on how close you are to the edge. So you can try and use clone instead of heal to remove that. You notice over here, this is a subtle change. There's a clone versus heal setting, and one versus the other might do a cleaner job. And by the way, I just happen to notice there's a spot here somewhere on the lens, so I'll just get rid of that too. All right, but here's the other difference. Because it was so far away from the original, the cloud color is different, so just move it closer. That way it blends in better around the edges so you don't see the edges. I just click, yep, that's a better thing. All right, and again, it's all those little things that will bug you to death if you don't take care of removing those little distractions from a UFO. Yeah, yes, I should have made it larger and added some windows to it to make it just kind of like a funny thing when you walk by. If you look closely, there's a UFO in the shot. Anyway, okay, so just get rid of little distractions that will bug you when you look at the photo. So, I consider anything a distraction that takes away from your enjoyment of the subject. So in other words, if I'm busy looking at something over here in the corner and not the scene, then that's a distraction because I'm so bothered by it or I'm so annoyed by it that I keep looking at it versus what I'm supposed to look at. That's a distraction. All right. Yep, and James is right. You can't unsee things like that once you see them. And like I said, every time I walk past that picture, it's like I had to take the print down because it was just too much. I couldn't take it. All right, next up, let's get into this is a fixing hair and stray eyebrows example. So fixing hair meaning stray hairs or hairs that are, again, distracting. So let me head over to Photoshop for this example. And let's go into, there's my fixed teeth. Somewhere in here, there should be a hair. There we go. Hair and eyebrows. And these are all stock. And whenever I show this technique, people kind of like it. So let me show it to you once again. All right, here we go. Now, again, I just want to be very clear. There's nothing wrong with her eyebrows. There's nothing wrong with her at all. But if you were a professional makeup artist, if you were an esthetician, I think that's the way you pronounce it, someone who focuses on these different parts of makeup and hair, then these eyebrows would bother you because they're little stray hairs sticking up. Now, it could be just as simple as taking a brush and brushing it, and it would be perfectly fine. But if you ended up with a shot where it didn't get that brush, those little hairs could bother you just like the antenna bothered me. So this is a quick way to fix it without having to do the whole shoot over again because, dang it, I wish I'd just taken a brush and brushed those hairs down so they wouldn't be sticking up. Her eyebrows are perfect, but just, again, a little bit of stray hair sticking up from the top. All right, so now how would I do that? I would go in and I would I would actually use a tool I don't use that often, the lasso tool. And I'm going to use my stylus here. I got my Wacom pen. Let's go ahead and just quickly, roughly, I can do a better job. Hang on, let's deselect. There we go. It doesn't matter how high I go up, but I kind of want to make the shape on the bottom kind of the same as the eyebrow that I should have. Now I'm going to move it up a little bit. All right, so now that I got the shape, what I want to do is I want to feather that shape. And how much you feather depends on the resolution of your image because it will literally depend, like low resolution, less feathering, high resolution, multi-megapixel camera, higher feathering. All right, so we want to modify, we want to go to feather, and that brings up a dialog box on my other display. Let's bring it over, and I want to feather this by, I don't know, it's high res, it's a stock image, maybe 15. I usually default to 20, but let's try 15 since I don't really know how many megapixels this image is. All right, that will soften the selection, so you don't see anything visually. Now we're going to lift that selection up onto its own layer, Command J or PC Control J. So all that did was that. It just put it up on its own layer, and we have a copy of her skin. Now, all we do is take the Move tool, switch to the Move tool, and we move that skin down. And that skin acts like our razor. There we go, just like that. Now, if it's, again, the skin was a little bit lighter down below than it is up top, so the edge is barely visible, I can see that. But I would now go ahead and blend that in, like merge that down. And then I would just simply take the patch tool, and where I see those edges, I would just go ahead and patch those in so we don't see those edges. And there you go. So just taking her existing skin, softening it a little bit and bringing it down to kind of smooth out that edge. And you have to do one eye at a time. There's no way you're going to get both eyes to be perfect and line up the right way. So I would then head over to the other eye and do like this eye looks pretty good. Like this eye didn't need it. But if it needed it, I would then do the same thing, draw this one and whatever. Now, you could also use it for things like this where there's like sticking up on the sides there. So let's just quickly, I'll just lasso this. All right, and again, we'll feather that. Select, modify, feather. 15 should be enough. Command J, PC Control J, and move that over. Oh, wait, whoa. I didn't Command J it. Hang on. Command J, there we go. Move that over. And we can use that to just clean up that edge real quick. All right, so that's just a quick hair example. There are other hair examples I have for stray hair, so forth and so on, but you got it. Just looking at the chat here, make sure I didn't miss anything. All right, okay. All right, let's go ahead and switch over to our next example. That was fixing hair. Next one is going to be liquifying. When to use the Liquify and for what reasons? So I use Liquify for a couple things. Actually, lots of things. I use Liquify especially when I'm doing something for fashion related. Now, when I say fashion related, I mean the clothes don't look like they fit because of some weird wrinkle or something sticking out. Like, for example, this side's fine, but this side, because she's got her arm up, it's created this bulge on the outside of her sleeve that isn't her arm. That's just material. So I might liquify that in just to bring it in and make it look tighter in a fashion shot. So how would I do that? Same thing we did before. We would go to filter menu. It'd come down to convert for smart filter so it's non-destructive. And then we would go into the Liquify filter. That will bring up its own window on the other monitor. I was like, where is it? There it is on the other monitor. Here we go. And we'll make this a little bigger. And we can even zoom in a little bit. Scroll it down or up. And now we want to push that sleeve over. So you're automatically on the right tool. You're on the forward warp tool. I don't know why it's the forward warp tool, but it's the forward warp tool. And Dana says, I've never used Liquify. Well, Dana, I'm going to show you some reasons why you might. Now, the trick is people always mess this up because they don't have the right brush size. You want your brush to be about the size of whatever it is you're moving. So if I use this small brush and I start pushing this over, I got to do several little pushes to get it to move over. And because I have to do more than one, you're probably going to notice it. So that's why we just make our brush bigger, much bigger. There we go. Even bigger than that. And that way you can literally pick up the whole thing and move it. And you don't have to do as much. You don't have to do as many because you've got a much bigger brush. And also, it also cuts down on any distortion you might have because I'm not only just moving the material, I'm also moving, like I got the material and the background in that brush. So that's the way we do it. So before, after, and once you do this on clothes, once you do this on stuff that's poking out and sticking out and things like that, you'll never not do it again because you'll notice it. And again, someone said earlier, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So there's that. And the only other thing I would tell you to do, and this is a godsend, this is like one of those things that I'm so happy the Photoshop team added. It's a little checkbox up here called Pin Edges. And I usually have that. I'm on a different machine. I'm on my MacBook Air M1. So I hadn't set that up yet, but I always turn it on and just leave it on, never turn it off. And what that stops you from doing, let's zoom out a little bit, is if that were off, and this has happened, this is how we ended up with a Photoshop fail category, is that you could always tell when someone liquefied because if they weren't paying attention to the edges of the photo, the edges of the photo would get pulled in, like, of course, I'm exaggerating, but the edges of the photo would be slightly pulled in and you would see it. And it was just like, aha, they use Liquify in that spot because I could see a little bit of the edge pulled in. Well, undo that. And if I have pin edges turned on, which I always have it turned on, it will never, I'm dragging, it will never let you, like I'm pulling in the color, but it will never let you leave that gap. It will never let you pull in that hole like it did before. So why would I ever not want that on? Unless I'm trying to pull the edge in. But in this case, I would always want it on for that kind of thing. All right, so now we click OK. And again, before, after, just cleaning up those kind of things. You can do it with hair too. I got a little hair poof, and you need to push the hair back down like you would with your hand, and do it after the fact with Liquify. All right, next one, and we're doing good on time. We might not even get through a second set of examples, so I'm glad I did it this way. Because if I did 4 examples on each one, we definitely wouldn't finish. All right, so let's go to next one, fixing and whitening teeth. All right, so teeth. I have some stock photos here with all kinds of teeth problems. Well, let's go to this one. Guy's got a broken tooth, chipped, and took the shot before he got to the dentist. He's going to get it fixed, but in this case, we didn't get it fixed in time for the shot. I've shown this example before because I just didn't have another broken tooth. I've shown, I think, both of these at some point once or twice. So again, in this case, how would we fix that? How would we put that tooth back in? And then, by the way, this is not a Lightroom thing. This is not something you could do in Lightroom because Lightroom doesn't have the ability to add pixels to the image or duplicate layers or anything like that. So you'd have to do this with Photoshop. So since I've got a good tooth, even though he's at a slight angle, I can still use it. What I'm going to do is just simply grab the good tooth or the tooth that's not chipped. Let's just put it that way. And we'll go ahead. We'll grab our lasso and we'll just go ahead and, oh, you know what? I've got better tools than that. I'll grab my object selection tool and we'll just grab that tooth as an object. I was going to try and lasso around it, but let me see if my object selection tool does a better job. I love the object selection tool. All right, so now I got that tooth perfectly selected, and it's now trying to give me the what's it called, the auto masking, which I don't need. I've got that tool perfectly selected, put it on its own layer, Command J or PC Control J. So now we have a tooth layer all by itself. And now we can take that tooth, because it's a duplicate, we're going to use our move tool. We're going to move it over. And of course, it looks wrong, but this is where it would be. And now we're going to free transform it and get it into place. So Command T or PC Control T to free transform. Right click, and we're going to flip horizontal because it would be, kind of facing the other way. And we're going to tilt it down. Maybe not that much. Maybe more. Move it in place. Scale it. This is just doesn't need to be as big as the other one. And then once we get it in place, which I'm still futzing with, and keep in mind, I'm not worried about there's a gap because he's got gaps on his other teeth. I could fill that in, but I don't need to. Maybe angle it a little bit more and maybe something like that. Now, keep in mind, the other tooth is still there, which is great. We need it. And we'll go ahead and put that in. And now that we got that other tooth, we got the new tooth in place with the other tooth underneath it. Maybe bring it down a little more. Now we just need to take care of the edges. So we're going to add a mask to this layer. So just click Layer Mask, Add. We're going to grab our black paintbrush. We're going to make our brush smaller. And then we can just literally, non-destructively mask out the edges of the new tooth so the other tooth shows through. There we go. Just something like that. There we go. All right, and again, you saw me do it, so you might say, oh, you missed a spot, you missed the edge there, and you would not miss those edges, but just quick down and dirty, that's before, that's after, and again, zoomed out, most people would never, ever notice that we added the tooth there. And you take your time, clean it up, zoom in more, get around the edges, tilt it a little more, get it just right, and if you wanted to fill the gap in the middle, you could, just that easily, it's not that hard. You can even start cloning some of this tooth over or stretch it or warp it over so that it covers the gap. There's just so many different ways to do it. Tooth clone tool. Ouch. Yep. Okay, cool. Great tip. And ouch. Yep. All right, got it. All right, so that's just one way to fix teeth. As far as whitening teeth, I don't know that I had a yellow example here, but let's say you did want to whiten the teeth, and I'm just going to merge this down for the sake of example. You can make a new layer merge, but just say, let's say this was the mouth that we were working with. Then, or let's say this tooth, like this tooth is kind of yellowish, and some of these are kind of yellow. So if I wanted to make these teeth a little white or a little brighter, I could go in. I'm just trying to think of how I want to select them. Let's try this. I don't know if this will work, but let's try it. Object selection tool. Just thinking about it. All right, and that's kind of what I want. I just want to kind of get the mouth selected. And again, let's get out of the object selection tool. It's trying to now give me the whole thing. And now I could go in and I could subtract, maybe quick select. There we go. I could start subtracting the part that I don't want, like his mouth part. I just want the teeth. There we go. There we go. So now we get the teeth. And you could go in individually and get rid of this, the gums or the parts in between. Oop, undo. The parts in between to make it more accurate. All right. Anyway, I'm not going to spend time on it, but anyway, get your selection just right is what I'm trying to say. Once you get your selection just right, you could make that its own layer, Command J. So now the teeth are on their own layer. And then you could just go in, you could use a variety of different methods. For example, you could use hue saturation adjustment layer. You could go into the yellows and you could just reduce the saturation of yellow. There we go. Look at that tooth. Look at that tooth. It's doing the whole face, but look at that tooth right now because it's just made that tooth whiter just by reducing the yellow. And then we don't want to do the whole face, so we would lock that layer. We would hold down our Option key, click in between the layers to group with previous. So that was before. So hold down my Option key where I get this little thing, Option or Alt, click to group with previous. That means it only affects the teeth layer. So that's before when the teeth were yellowish. And that's after where we took the yellow out. So lots of different ways to do that, but that's a quick down and dirty trick to do it. All right. Yay, we get to get into one of my favorite examples here. We're going to start removing backgrounds. Let's go here where we got some people. And we go to some landscapes where we have some things we want to put the people on. So let's open up this aerial photo of Philadelphia. That I've used before, but this I have not. And we'll drag her onto it. All right, there she is. Okay. Zoom out. Kind of put her in place. All right, so now we've got one layer on top of another layer, and we have the layer with the person on it, and we're just going to go into our select menu, and first thing I would do is choose select subject. So select subject uses our AI-based Adobe Sensei powered select subject to select the subject. All right, now we got the subject selected. We'll click on select and mask to edit the selection here. So I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to increase my transparency so I can kind of see what that would give me. And it does a really good job, but there's always going to be one problem. Because the subject was on a color, like they were on blue, you can kind of see that blue reflected in her hair. And that is, we call that color contamination. So the background contaminated the subject. And if she being put on a different blue background, you might get away with it. But in this case, she's put on a background that's not so blue. So I would want to go in and make sure I go to my output settings, and there is a decontaminate colors button right there. So I would just go ahead and decontaminate colors. And if that didn't do it alone, like it kind of did the edge here, but didn't do it right here, then next thing I would do is go into my second tool on the left here, the Refine Edge Brush. And I would go in and I would just like start where the background used to be. So the background used to be out here, and then brush in and see if that will start actually giving me more blue, or is it giving me sweater? I can't tell. All right, actually, that's not horrible. It's not the best, but it's not horrible. Yeah, so there's some blue being reflected up from the sweater. I'm not sure if the sweater was just missing or there we go. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for, where it kind of turns that blue into blonde, because she's blonde, and where there were edges inside that it missed, I would just go in and make sure I get all of those edges cleaned up. So you could just literally take the brush around the edge of your subject to kind of clean it up and make sure that you don't get any of that. The only thing I'm not crazy about this, the effect that's happening here, but otherwise it looks pretty good. That just might be that there's nothing I can do about that in this dialog box because it's just so blue. But I don't also, okay, now, well, I take that back. There's one more thing I can do. I can go to the next brush down. The next brush down has a plus and minus option. So I'm on the plus, and basically what that allows me to do is restore parts of the photo they're being eliminated by this tool. So I can say, you know what? This is just missing this edge. So I can paint that edge back. Yeah, that's what it is. That's an edge. That's not really her hair. that is the sweater. And then I can go ahead and hold down the Option or Alt key. And if I overpaint it, I can paint it back out. There you go. Beautiful. All right. I was nitpicking that one little corner, but you get the idea. So now let's zoom out. And if the minute you turn on Decontaminate Colors, it's going to automatically choose to output this with a new layer with a mask. So yes, that's what I want. Give me a new layer with a mask. And now there's one more thing I would do. Because when you're compositing a subject like this onto a new background, 9 times out of 10, the color in your subject, like the lighting and color in your subject, is not going to match the background because they're shot in 2 different locations, 2 different times a day, different lighting conditions. So this is like a sunset or sunrise over Philadelphia, and she looks like she was photographed in the studio. So they don't match. So luckily, we do have a new neural filter. If I go to filters and come down to neural filters, there's a neural filter now called harmonization. And if I go to harmonization and turn it on, nothing happens. But if I turn it on and then choose what to harmonize that with, which is the background in this case, and let it calculate, it always, by the way, is set too high by default. So let's see what it does. It's giving me, now it looks like it made her darker, which it did, but it's giving me that color. So the strength slider is how much of that color it's pulling from Philadelphia. The brightness slider could always be used to brighten up the subject without changing the color. So I just want the subject to be a little brighter on that background. And now you might say, well, it looks like she looks like sunburned or whatever. But no, if you see the before and after, that's the before, that's the after, that's about right. That's what it would look like if she'd been photographed under those lighting conditions. So you can always tweak the sliders, bring down strength more, increase the brightness more, get it to look the way you want it to look. But that's about right from a color perspective, what it would do. And again, you could always bring the strength down if you thought it was too much. All right, so that's removing the background, adding to it, replacing the background, and of course, quick harmonization tip thrown in there as a final step. All right, now this one comes up anytime we mention any type of retouching or editing. People always want to know about skin smoothing. And I'll be honest, I used to be really heavily into skin smoothing, like doing it on every single photo. And then I learned you don't need to do it on every single photo. You don't need to do it on most photos because people's skin, it should look like their skin, like her skin or his skin. I don't know, his or her, I don't know. But their skin doesn't really look, it doesn't need smoothing. It's fine. You need to see pores. You need to see the skin. When you overdo it is when the skin looks like a Barbie doll. It looks plastic. There are no pores left. That means you've overdone it. So I'm going to show you two techniques for when you want to do it and when you have to. And there's no, I can't think of too many times when you have to, but if you want to do it, I'll show you two techniques and we'll just leave it there. All right, so number one. So I could go into my, first of all, duplicate the layer, Command J. Duplicate the layer, and then I would go into my filter menu, and I would apply I was just thinking about which method I was going to do. Apply a Gaussian blur, and the amount is what you're visually looking at to see, is that blurry enough? Like, is that smooth enough? Now, that's too much to me because I'm losing pores, but let's bring it back down a little bit, like maybe somewhere around in there on this photo. Maybe a little bit less because I want to see more. I want to see some pores. Yeah, right about in there. That's before, after. It's smoother, but I can still see pores. Then click OK. And then obviously you don't want that to do it to everything. You don't want it on her lips. You don't want it on her fingernails. You don't want it on her ears, whatever. So you can hold down your Option or Alt key and add a mask. So that added a mask to the layer that hid that effect. So that effect is completely hidden, not applied at all. Now you go to your brush, you go to white color on your brush, make your brush bigger, and then you can paint it in where you need the skin smoother. So if I needed the skin smoother in these areas, I can now just brush it in where I want it. So that is one way to do skin smoothing. This is the method I've used for years. Now, this is still too much, but I'm just giving you an example. Like, I still think that number is too high, but I'm going to show you how to fix it. All right, so let's say that I needed to brush all of that in. Again, I'm avoiding the areas that I want to remain sharp. All right, so that's one method. And now, because it's on its own layer, if it's too much or not enough, or in this case, too much, I should say if it's too much, you can then just dial it down, dial down the opacity. And you can say, no, I don't want it to be that like overly done. I can drop the opacity down of that layer. So here's my before, here's my after. So it's just a subtle change. Still have pores, they're just not as pronounced. All right, so that's one way to do it. I'm going to turn that layer off. Another way to do it, let's go to our background again, and let's go into filter, not neural filters, convert for smart filters, so it's non-destructive. Done. And then go to filter and come down to camera raw. Because in the camera raw filter, and you can do this in Lightroom, in the camera raw filter, you've got all the new masking capabilities, the whole new masking panel, but you have the adjustment brush that you've always had. And with the adjustment brush, here we'll just make it smaller. There we go. And we'll just paint this in. Now it's looking like it's making our face red. It's just showing us where we're painting. That's not what it's really doing. It's just like you covered these areas. All right, great. Okay, so now that I've covered those areas, now what do I want to do with those areas? I would come down to texture. Remember that texture slider we used? Well, we don't want to add texture. We want to go the other way. So let's go ahead and pull down the texture. So that's way down, too much. That's way high, too much. But you can just slightly just do some skin smoothing with negative texture. And that way it's non-destructive. You can always come back, readjust it, rebrush it, so forth and so on, in both Lightroom Classic, and of course Camera Raw. So that is the effect before, after, very subtle changes being applied. All right, let's go ahead and do our, oh shoot, we're on our last one. So we didn't get to go back. So let's do this one really quickly. I'm going to go back to Lightroom. And before we're out of time, and edit original. And we are out of time, but I was just going to show you a quick dodge and burn technique. If I don't get cut off, oh no, it's opening. I'm going to get cut off. All right, dodge and burn really quickly. Duplicate the layer, set the layer to luminosity blend mode. Luminosity. and set the opacity down to 50% or thereabouts, and grab your dodge and burn tool. And you want to make the areas that should be darker, make the areas that should be lighter, and that just gives you this sculpting effect on your photo. So I'm out of time, folks, but hopefully you got something out of this, and hopefully you will come back in 2 weeks for more. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and say goodbye to folks. Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend. Have a good holiday if I don't talk to you before then. And we will stay tuned for the daily creative challenge for Photoshop, I believe. And with that, we're going to say goodbye. If I can find, there we go. There we go. All right. Bye, everybody.